na magbigay ng libreng shuttle services.
COVID-19 infections in the Philippines continue to dip on Wednesday. The DOH tallied 15,700 new cases nationwide, bringing the total caseload to 3.47 million. And the Octa Research Group says that Metro Manila is now under high-risk classification for COVID-19. This is lower or down from severe outbreak status that we were on last week.
The Health Department reported 5 deaths caused by the Omicron variant as government is monitoring Metro Manila and 22 other areas that continue to report high COVID-19 growth rates. But will the numbers decrease as vaccinations expand? We discuss in this episode of The Chiefs. Welcome to this midweek edition of The Chiefs. I'm Ed Lingao. Also with us, Ana Marie Pamintuan of the Philippine Star and Lucy Cruz Valdez, the head of News 5. Ladies, happy midweek.
Happy midweek.
Hello! Happy day.
Bumaba ulit ang numbers today, and that's pretty good.
Kaya medyo happy nga, di ba?
Yeah.
Kaya lang, yung mga workers, nag-aalala ngayon. Dahil,
Yeah, 1 month to go.
1
They
month
have 1 month to have themselves vaccinated or
fully
else.
vaccinated kasi kahit single dose lang daw, hindi pa sasakayin eh.
Hindi pa rin pwede, no?
And I suppose what's really interesting to point out is that wala na exemptions for
Wala na.
workers.
Wala na.
So,
Wala na potential.
oh, although we tried to talk to
Hindi, meron pa rin naman na essential.
May sakit.
Pero,
yeah,
oo.
yung pero
mga
hindi
may
na yung
sakit.
general
Tsaka
hindi na yung
pagka
general exemption
essential,
for
pag-
workers.
yeah.
Kasi
Yeah.
dati basta alert level
The
3
workers.
allowed yung business mo as a worker, you can go out eh. And we
Yeah.
tried to talk to Dole about it. Ang Dole didn't want to talk about it kasi nalilito raw sila eh. they still need to get clarity on that. Okay.
May opinion dyan yung guest natin, di ba? Baka pwede natin siya.
Pwedeng tanongin yan.
Certainly,
Abogado
of
rin.
course. Okay, I smell the segue coming in. So here we go. We begin tonight with the 2022 People's Reform Party Senatorial Aspirant, Attorney Harry Roque. Attorney Harry, welcome back to the Chiefs.
Hi,
Hello, Harry. Good
Manila.
evening.
It's always a pleasure to be back at the Chiefs, and good evening to everyone.
Oh, biglang nabago yung background mo kanina.
Gandeng
Sabi
ganda.
kasi, sabi kasi kanina, green ang suit mo, green pa ang background. Naghanap ako ng ibang virtual background.
Ang bilis, di ba?
We actually used this background on our first electronic rally, no? So that was a very successful one, and I think we reached 600,000 views on that electronic rally.
Okay. Well, Attorney Harry, of course, we do want to talk about your platform and the issues that are close to your heart. But I hope you don't mind. I'll start off with something that also has to do with the elections pa rin and with your ticket. Kasi mas recent to eh. I'm talking, of course, about your standard bearer, the standard bearer of your ticket, si Bongbong Marcos and his statements in the last few days. And what your position is about that. Kasi ang sabi ni Bongbong Marcos, ayaw niya munang pag-usapan yung nakaraan. The past 35 years, nasagot na raw lahat ng dapat sagutin, and it should be left at that na. And that's why, among other things, he refuses to appear before some media organizations. I'm wondering lang po, from your point of view, you have championed media issues in the past. You've worked closely with media. What is your opinion of this? Do you think, or are you satisfied na hindi dapat inuungkat itong mga isyong ito na gustong hindi pag-usapan ni Bongbong Marcos?
Fortunately, I'm not spokesperson for anyone,
Yes, sir.
and I have no opinion. Let him answer that for himself. I will answer only questions relevant to my personal positions. No? If that is his decision, so be it. But I'm not similarly situated. I'm not the front runner. I'm the tail ender, and I will accept any and all media invitations. No? So the more invitations, the merrier. So kapag hindi kayo tinanggap ni Bongbong Marcos, come to me and I will accept the invitation.
And we certainly will, sir. Pero sir, I'm not asking you to speak for Bongbong Marcos. I'm asking you your personal opinion about that position of your standard bearer.
Well, I have no opinion, no, because that's his opinion, no. That's for him to answer, no, and he has answered it, no. As far as I'm concerned, I'm more than willing to discuss issues because that's the only way I will have any chance at all of reaching the Senate. No? Telling the people that I know how policies should be made and how the law should be written in a manner that would bring about genuine change. So
Oh, sige, I'll rephrase. I'll rephrase. Do you think that that backfired, or do you think that that was harmless to him?
Well, if I were the front runner and a media interview can only be negative to me, I probably will also not do the interview. But as I said, I'm not the front runner, I'm the tail ender, and I welcome any and all interviews.
Yeah, so you think that was a strategic answer to the invitation?
Well, there are interviews where you don't gain anything, and if you think it will have negative impact on your standing, then you might as well not do it.
Yeah, we will not press you. I'll ask you about something close to your heart as well, human rights, in relation to this latest pronouncement of the government na starting February 26 daw, lahat na daw ng unvaxxed or partially vaccinated workers hindi na pasasakayin sa public transport. What is your opinion on this expansion of the no vax, no ride policy?
It's perfectly constitutional. There are three inherent powers of the state which exist whether or not it is implemented by an implementing law. No? One of them is inherent police power of the state, and this is intended, of course, to protect and promote public health, among others. No? Of course, when you talk about the exercise of police powers, there inevitably would be violations of individual rights. But that violations become justified because of a bigger interest, a bigger societal interest. And this is, of course, the promotion of public health. We all know how infectious the Omicron variant is. We all know that although the vaccinated ones do not get seriously ill or hospitalized, those unvaccinated, though, can still become critical or will even die. No? And there's also the possibility of infecting others. So I think it is a just and reasonable exercise of police power. And all those who disagree or think otherwise are welcome to go to court because that's precisely why we have judicial review.
What about yung sabi ng labor groups na it's anti-labor daw? You have been championing the right of workers to go to work during the pandemic. Ano naman ang masasabi niyo?
On the contrary, majority of the Filipinos are already vaccinated. No? So majority of the workers are already vaccinated. No? We have breached the 70% mark. No? And number two, of course, it doesn't cost the workers anything because it's for free. It's paid for by taxpayers' money. No? And of course, there is no discrimination here because all you have to do if you want to take public transportation is to have yourself vaccinated. Otherwise, take a bicycle.
Harry, I'll have to ask you this. No, you're in the Senate slate of the unity team of Bongbong Marcos. We also know you to have fought for the human rights victims under martial law. In fact, you were one of those who filed the House Bill 226, seeking to make permanent the Human Rights Victims Claims Board. How do you feel about now working on the unity team with Bongbong Marcos? And what does that make of your cause when you were a congressman on the human rights claims?
Well, that's the beauty of legislation. I have made a stand in favor of human rights, as in fact, I was one of the principal authors for the compensation bill for the victims of martial law abuses. No? So I think I was instrumental in providing reparation to the victims of human rights, including compensation. Now, I have also reviewed the record of Bongbong Marcos Jr. There is no case, whether be it for ill-gotten wealth or for human rights violation, where he was in fact impleaded. I've examined all the ATCA cases in the United States, and they are against President Marcos, Imelda Marcos, and even Amy Marcos. No? But Bongbong Marcos was never impleaded in the Alien Torts Claims Act action where they procured a judgment against the Marcos estate. Of course, he is an interested party because he inherits part of the estate. but there was no ruling by the U.S. courts that he was personally responsible for any human rights violations in the Philippines. And that's why the last time I was with you, I said I did my due diligence. And I think I'm certain that there is no judicial pronouncements that Bongo Marcos was responsible for any human rights violations. It's not something that you can say about his parents or his sister, but personally, he should not be held responsible for the acts of others.
Well, it's true,
Yes, I
Attorney,
agree with you.
that
That would be great if Bongbong Marcos were just a private citizen or maybe even as a senator, which we allowed. But now that he's gunning for the highest position in the land, and knowing as how, you know, the history of this nation has been so adversely affected by what his father and his family as a whole has done, does it not bother you that you know, this person could actually win, be president again, and well, basically neutralize whatever gains may have been made over the last 35 years?
No, on 2 points. Number one, the presumption of innocence applies to all, even to sons of dictators. I have again read the judicial records. There's not been any indictment against Bongbong Marcos. And secondly, of course, we now have sufficient safeguards to prevent a repeat of 1972. No? The 87 Constitution no longer allows any institution to abolish Congress. And the 1987 Constitution now allows the courts and Congress to review both the factual and the legal basis for the declaration of martial law. One criticism leveled against the 87 Constitution now, it is very difficult to exercise an inherent power of the chief executive to suspend both the writ of habeas corpus and the declaration of martial law. But those are sufficient safeguards against the rise of another authoritarian regime.
Well, Attorney, it's true that he was never impleaded in any of the cases, but he was a signatory to several pleadings laying claim to the Swiss bank accounts, which were, in the end, ruled as ill-gotten wealth by the Supreme Court in 2003. He was part of the pleadings. In fact, he even testified before the Sandigan Bayan.
But
At the
he
same
was not
time,
a party.
And just to add to that,
He signed as an administrator, a co-administrator of the estate, but he was not impleaded as a party. He was impleaded as an executor of the estate, because an estate has a separate personality of its own, no? Separate and distinct from the deceased, and separate and distinct from the individuals acting as executors.
yes, sir. But not only that, he was also actively laying claim to the money. Him, his sisters, and Imelda Marcos. At the same time, we're also looking at the 1997 ruling with finality of the Supreme Court, which stated that the Marcos estate owes 23 billion in estate taxes, which was fine already and has not yet been paid for. And unfortunately, Bongbong Marcos din po yung estate administrator. So what happens to that ruling?
An estate administrator only administers the estate. There is no ruling that he was in fact the one who amassed the ill-gotten wealth. We do not know who is responsible for the ill-gotten wealth. Perhaps, in fact, it was a ruling of the court that because this comprised part of the Marcos estate, that the money accumulated by the father is ill-gotten. I will accept that. But he was not impleaded as a person responsible for the graft and corruption. He was impleaded as the administrator of the estate. It was not because he was the one who accumulated ill-gotten wealth. That's very clear from the records.
Yes, sir. But that raises the question: what happens to that pending payment that's been there since 1997? That's 23 billion. And if you follow some Bayan's argument, that could go up to 200 billion already. But that's their calculation. I'm just sticking to the 23 billion of the Supreme Court.
I do not know how much the amount is because no one knows with certainty. What I do know was when I was one of the co-authors of the Marcos compensation bill, we distributed a specific amount of money which the Swiss courts determined should belong to the Philippine people. No? So it was an X amount of money, although I have no personal knowledge how much the ill-gotten wealth could be. No? But then again, I'm stressing, being an administrator does not mean you amass the ill-gotten wealth.
Yes, sir. And I think we should laud you for your role in that law, awarding the money to the victims. But isn't there any discomfort there that you acknowledge that problem, you acknowledge the victims, you acknowledge the ill-gotten wealth, but your principal, well, not your principal, but your standard bearer does not until now?
I cannot attribute the act of another person to another. There is no such thing as guilt by association. I was, in fact, deemed by many as also being guilty by mere association because I was spokesperson to the president. There is absolutely no legal basis. And in fact, in our jurisprudence, when you read in Re Yamashita, one of the grounds by which Yamashita was in fact acquitted on appeal was because the lower courts allowed guilt by association, which the court ruled was contrary to the presumption of innocence and, of course, fair play.
So do you believe that he will be a better president than his father if indeed he becomes president? Is that what you're saying? That he will be a different president from his father? And
All
that
I
he
can
will,
say-
he
Yeah.
will put the state in front of his family's interests?
I don't think we can make a fair comparison between the father and son. But what I will say is that like Inday Sara Duterte, I do agree that experience as a local government executive is most relevant in evaluating the competence of a person for the office of the presidency. And he's had the longest experience as a local executive government. He was, if I'm not mistaken, a 3-term governor before he became a congressman and a senator. And no other candidate for the presidency has that long experience as a local executive. I think only Ping Lacson could rival the length of service of Apo Bongbong, but Ping Lacson served exclusively in the Senate, which is legislative.
Well, you've mentioned Mayor Sara now. Tatanungin na rin namin because she has stirred controversy with her proposal for mandatory military service. Are you supporting that proposal?
Well, I could see the rationale for it, although I don't think it can be easily implemented because there's the issue of budget. No one can be made to serve without payment of compensation, no? And I do not know where we will get the money if we were to require everyone 18 years old and above for 1 year to serve in the military. Already, I have personal experience because when the president doubled the salary of policemen and soldiers, we had a very difficult problem of how to fund it. And that's just doubling the salary. More so if we were to hire 5 times more the people that we already have in the military. But my estimate is it will not just be 5 times more, probably 6 or 7 times more. So I think it will be a logistical challenge to implement that.
Mandatory ROTC, which is the proposal of President Duterte. Are you in favor of that?
Well, for as long as it is above 18, because the Geneva Convention, as well as the Convention on the Rights of the Child, prohibits the conscription or the recruitment into the armed forces of minors, no? And that's now enshrined in both the law applicable in armed conflicts and the law applicable in times of peace.
Okay.
Going back to BBM, no, of course, we cannot but, of course, ask you questions that have to do with BBM now that you're in his unity team. No? What is your position on the SAL-N? As you know, Bongbong has said in his interview with 1PH's sa Totoo Lang that he is afraid that with the SAL-N, he, what happened to Chief Justice Renato Corona then in regard to the SAL-N might also be used in the same way with him or anyone. What do you have to say about SAL-Ns? You for or against?
Well, you see, that is already the policy decision of the Ombudsman, the constitutional body created by our Constitution to implement accountability of public officers. And he has said that the SAL-Ns of certain officials, including the president, will remain confidential unless there are serious grounds for the release. No? Of course, anyone can then apply for the release of SAL-Ns, no? But it will have to be the ombudsman to decide on the issue. I think it's
But
pronounced.
setting that aside, Harry, really, setting aside Ombudsman Martirez's order, no, or conditionality. But setting that aside, do you think, because you are a human rights fighter, okay, you are a human rights advocate, and you know the history of SALNs, you know it. It's precisely to prevent, ill-gotten wealth. It's precisely to prevent corruption. It's precisely to be able to check on whether our government officials are, carting away the wealth of the nation. So, and you know that the SALN precisely was a law to make sure that it doesn't happen again. So, how do you feel about the SALN now, setting aside Maduro's order? Is that something that you yourself will agree to do, to release your SALN, and do you think others should?
When I was a congressman, it was published.
Yeah.
It is only the executive that did not publish it anymore, following the footsteps of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court at one point also published the SALNs, no? But at a certain point, they said, well, they will also have now to show good reasons because magistrates are subject, of course, to public pressure. No? So it's not the executive that was first in this initiative. It was the Supreme Court itself, which the Ombudsman then adopted, no, as applicable for all other officials because, of course, the Supreme Court is an independent branch of government. No? But I've always submitted my SALN pursuant to the law. And when I was a part of the legislative branch of government, it was published every year. In fact, there's always a betting on who will be the richest in the House and who will be in the poorest. Fortunately, I was always in the middle.
Okay, Attorney Harry,
Okay,
we
so-
just have to go into a break, so we hope you can stay with us for a few more minutes while we go into a gap. We will be
Sure.
right back. Welcome back to Chiefs on One News. We continue our discussion with People's Reform Party 2022 Senatorial Aspirant Attorney Harry Roque. Attorney Roque, I'll take off from where Lucy left off. Doon pa rin tayo sa SALN. Now, I know you cited your case where you released your SALNs and that's really laudable. A lot of congressmen don't do that. And now you have all three branches not doing it at all. However, what I want to ask you about is not what you did, but what you will do and what you will push for in terms of policy or legislation. Kasi among other things, we go back to the Ombudsman Circular. Ang sabi ng Ombudsman ngayon, you cannot get a SALN not unless the public official agrees that you can get his SALN. And that appears to go against RA 6713, which basically guarantees that so long as reasonable time is provided for, the public can get access to SALNs for a period of up to 10 years from the filing. Tapos na si Ombudsman Martires wants to penalize commentary on SALN with the 5 years jail time and 5,000 pesos. So kayo po, kung kayo maupo sa Senado, ano po yung patakaran? Ano po yung gusto niyo itulak? Ano po yung inyong polisiya? Ano po yung inyong gustong patakaran o batas?
You know, there's really a lacune in the law. I do not blame the Supreme Court and I do not blame the Ombudsman. The lacune there is while it is required to be filed, the law is not clear on whether or not it could actually be released publicly and under what circumstance. And that is why when I was in Congress, I filed 220 bills of national significance. I enacted about 10 of them into law, including universal health care. But included in the 210 or so laws that I intend to refile in the Senate is the Freedom of Information Bill, because it is the freedom of information that will fit in the lacune, and that would be the legal basis to compel all branches of government to release their SALNs. And of course, if I make it to the Senate, the Senate has a standing tradition too, that because they are elective policymakers, they also make public their statement of assets and liabilities and net worth. And I'm fully supportive of making these SALNs public.
Pero
That is
sir,
why I hope we get to
hindi
the
po ba
Senate.
hindi po ba malinaw sa 6713? Tatlo lamang yung bawal sa pag-release ng SALN eh. Commercial use except for news and information. Number 2 is if it's against public morals, and number 3 is if it's against public policy. Hindi po ba that was already clear in the law na other than that you can photocopy, it even says in the law, you can photocopy, you can reproduce, you should be given access within 10 days of filing, and so on down the line.
And the provision or the position of the Supreme Court and the Ombudsman is precisely anchored on the third exception, that it is contrary to public policy. Because it is contrary to public policy to hold hostage, apparently, magistrates as well as high officials of the land, no? Essentially for blackmail, supposedly, no? So they are using, in fact, the third exception. They are not in breach of the law, but invoking an exception, which is why an FOI law would cure this lacunae and make it clear once and for all that releasing SALNs should not be considered as contrary to public policy.
You know, the FOI law has been tossed around for a long time. You think may pag-asa pa yung mapasta? Considering
may pag-asa naman ang anything, no? In fact, ano nga ba yun? I was just talking to someone. When I was in Congress, it was virtually impossible. Then all of a sudden, the president, it's the creation of the OFW, the Department of OFW. I was also the first to file the House bill for that. But when I lobbied with the DBM, then Secretary Jokno of DBM said, we have a policy to streamline government agencies and not to create new bureaucracies. No? What a difference 3 years could make, no? Because 3 years later, the president, in fact, signed the creation of the Department of OFW. So nothing is etched in stone, and that's actually the nature of public policy.
Okay, Lucy, you know? Okay. Attorney Harry Roque, maraming salamat for joining us tonight, and we hope to have you back.
yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Harry.
Please have me back.
Thank you.
If Bongbong Marcos doesn't want to be interviewed, I'll take his place. But please, don't make me his spokesperson because he's not paying me to be his spokesperson.
Okay, basta lang hindi mo sasabing biased kami.
Okay?
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Maraming salamat.
Thank you.
That was People's Reform Party Senatorial Bet Attorney Harry Roque. Okay, and from there we will be, Lucy and Ami, our next guest will be coming from Okta Research. They will be joining us in a few minutes. They will be, they're here already?
You're already here. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Andiyan na pala. Ha?
There na, kaya tumigil kami.
Oh, yan. Yan na. Nakikita ko na si Prof. Guido. Prof, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay,
good
here we
evening.
go. Okay, is Father Nick joining us? Or
Yes.
solo kayo?
Yeah, he's already here.
Yeah.
They're both here already.
Okay, they're both here. Okay. Welcome
Yeah.
back to the Chiefs. Professor Guido David and Father Nick Austriaco of the Okta Research Group. Ayun. Here we go.
Hi, Father. Hi, Professor Guido.
Hi.
Good evening po and welcome back. Okay, whenever you guys are on the show, we always ask you about the trends. Not because we want to know what's trending, but because we want to know where we're headed. As far as DOH is concerned, and I suppose Okta Research is concerned, mukhang pababa na tayo sa Metro Manila. Pero nationwide ba? Are we seeing that? Or may possibility pa na magka-glitch?
Well, I will take that question. And mukhang naka-black and white kami ni Father. He's the bishop and I'm the pawn. But anyway, yung trend is really downwards. We can be assured kasi for a while, there were some talks na maybe we're not seeing the actual trend baka because of the testing. But the testing hasn't really decreased. We're still testing about the same level in the NCR. And we're now down to high risk. And I think within a few days by next week, we'll be down to moderate risk. In fact, I checked some of the local government data, and we already have 5 LGUs under moderate risk already. And that's a good sign because it means they're ahead of the pack. I mean, they're improving faster. And these LGUs include Manila, Malabon, Caloocan, Valenzuela, and Navotas. Interestingly, 4 of them, they're from District 3 and District 1. District 1 is Manila, and District 3 would be the other 4. And yeah, so they're already under moderate risk. The rest of the NCR are still at high risk, but that will be improving soon. Pero regarding your other question, Ed, yes, it's going to be still increasing in some provinces outside NCR+. In NCR+, it's already decreasing.
Yeah.
Even in Cavite, Rizal, and Bulacan, we're starting to see a decrease, but it's still high in many other parts of the country. So although yun nga, yung projection namin by Feb 14, by Valentine's, we could be at, maybe possibly at low risk already sa NCR, which would be good news, of course. Rest of the country will have to follow kasi the surge started later in the other parts of the country.
Pero Professor,
But you expected...
sabi ni Yusek Barrera, up to 40% daw nung numbers affected nung antigen testing na hindi nare-report. What's the impact on your projections? Ganun kalaki, medyo malaki yun. That's 40% cases unreported.
Well, I mean, ever since naman the numbers are what we see will be lower than the actual numbers. Right now, there's more antigen testing being done. There are some asymptomatics who don't test. There are some they just isolate, they don't test. And then there are some who self-test. They buy the antigen test kits and then they test at home. Pero what we look at is the trend. And in fact, yung estimate namin, it could be about 10 times higher on average than what we're seeing. I mean, that was probably during the peak. Once it goes down, the actual numbers will probably be closer to what we are seeing. And why are we confident about the trend? Because not just the numbers going down, but the positivity rate is down to 24%. Actually, I think it's down to 23% as of today, from a high of 50%. So yung positivity rate is a form of sampling, statistical sampling. And if you see a decreasing positivity rate, that means the trend is actually decreasing. And not only that, we're also seeing a decrease in hospital utilization. It's now down below 50% for ICUs and for hospital beds.
Father Nick, they're really now pushing for vaccinations for minors, for children. And of course, some people are asking, especially parents with young kids, whether this is even necessary, having seen the mild effects of Omicron. Is it correct to say that the virus is getting weaker as evidenced by the Omicron symptoms? And so if that is the case, then why should we still need to push for vaccination among the minors? Isn't the risk greater at this point?
So thank you for that question. There's several things I have to raise in response to your question. So first of all, Omicron is milder than Delta, but it still kills, and especially for those who are unvaccinated. It's mild, but for those who are unvaccinated, mild can be, as I know for two close friends in the United States who are unvaccinated, who are still in their 40s, they were in bed for 10 days. And what they're experiencing now is long COVID. So the concern actually, I think, is that we must not underestimate the long-term consequences of this virus. It may be mild, but it has long-term effects that we do not appreciate. And I think for our children, first of all, the safety, it's the formulation for the pediatric vaccination is not the same as adults. It has been proportionately decreased to take into account that our children are smaller and younger. But the safety studies have still been done. And millions of children throughout the world, especially in the global north, have been vaccinated. So we have a sense of the safety profile, and the safety profile is as good as it is for the adults. And we have no knowledge of the long-term effects of long COVID on children. So, a child might get mild COVID, and there are adults who get mild COVID who have long COVID 6 months to a year later. So, we should try to avoid illness as much as we can. And that is what the vaccinations are attempting to do. They're attempting to avoid illness from the virus because there are still many things we do not understand about viral infection.
So, Father, since Omicron is causing pediatric infections, and we have been reporting Omicron deaths actually not only in the Philippines, in other countries as well. How worried should we be that people are not reporting their test results anymore? They're isolating. In fact, they're not even getting tested.
Well, I mean, the numbers were so huge that I don't think there were enough tests to test all of our Filipino kababayans who were sick. And I keep going back to the Department of Transportation random test on January 12, where they discovered that 14.6% of their 233 passengers were positive. If this is a random sampling, and there's reason to believe that it could be, that means at that point, it's 1.8 million of our Filipinos in the NCR were positive. So there was a report published by the University of Washington that projected that by the end of March, half of the planet will have Omicron or will have had Omicron. 3.5 billion people will have been infected with Omicron. So clearly the numbers are underreported, and the modeling basically says only 5% of through infections are recorded. So we know what's going on. We have a sense of what's going on. We know that the fire is burning through the forest. Shortly, there will be no more trees to burn because billions of people will have been infected or will be vaccinated. So I'm not concerned that we don't have control over the virus. I think we have an adequate understanding of the virus. I mean, here in the Philippines, the experience with the NCR has shown that we survived that surge. We did not overwhelm our hospitals, by the grace of God. And even now that the NCR plus is going down, the risk to the hospitals is significantly been mitigated because there was a concern that the NCR would go down, but then Region 3 and Region 4A would then shift their patients to the NCR. But we have not really seen that. So it suggests that at least in the capital, we were spared the brunt of the Omicron surge.
Mm-hmm. Well, Father, with that in mind, let me ask you, is it already safe to say that we have Omicron under control? Let me go back to what your earlier quoted as saying. I hate to ask this of a man of God, but is the end near?
Well, I think, it's interesting. As I said, 3 weeks ago, the beginning of the end of the pandemic, and now more and more people are saying basically the same thing. Once you see that the Omicron has done what it has done, at least in the NCR, I think the beginning of the end, I am still worried about hospital occupancy in the rest of the country, right? So we still do not know the impact of the Omicron on regions of the country where vaccinations are not as extensive as the NCR,
Father.
And hospital capacity is lower than the NCR. That's what I still pray for today, every day, because the NCR may be in a good place, but we still do not know what's happening in the rest of our country.
Actually, Father, that's what I meant to ask. Kasi, as far as the NCR is concerned, medyo, I guess we're already past, we're already past that point of that worry point. But all the other regions where you have vaccination rates at what, 10%, 20%, and all that. What are the chances, or is that already past na rin? What are the chances that we could have an unmanageable spike in the provinces that would reverse everything all over again?
What do you mean by that? It's unlikely that Omicron will return to the capital to initiate a surge. There's no more wood to burn. With regards to the provinces, there is a concern, and it's going to be region by region, depending upon the level of vaccination and the health capacity, how the impact of the Omicron surge will be on our kababayans there.
Yes, Father.
So
what
we
I meant
have
is,
to wait for the surge to peak in these places. Once we are post-peak, we will have a sense of whether things are getting better. But I still pray for those other regions. It's still going to be challenging for some.
yes, Father. What I mean is, kasi, for example, the NCR, we're already good with NCR, but you're only looking at 13 to 14 million people. The rest of the country, you're looking at, what, 90 plus, 95 million people. So, of course, the countryside far outnumbers Metro Manila. That's my perspective. What are the chances that Omicron could still spiral out of control in the rest of the country?
I mean, is there a chance that a particular region will be overwhelmed? Certainly, if the vaccination rate is low and the hospital capacity is low and the infection explodes, then they will have challenges to their healthcare system, even with mild cases. But it's hard to predict exactly where and if this will happen, only because it's a region by region situation.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm curious about the endemic possibilities. That's what you said before. I remember that we're moving toward a state of endemic. We could be. How close are we to that with the numbers that we're seeing? And what happens exactly if we go by Professor Guido's projection that what's happening in the regions now will probably follow the same pattern as NCR? What's at the end of that when they're finally peaked? And can we expect another variant from this one, and then another surge, and so on and so forth? When will it end, really?
So I'm going to quote two numbers. So half of the population, based upon that Washington, Seattle projection, will have natural infection-acquired immunity. So that's 55 million Filipinos. As of a few days ago, 55 million people in the Philippines are fully vaccinated. 7 million of them have been boosted. Okay, so now think about that. You have 55 million with natural immunity and 55 million with vaccinated immunity. But there's going to be an overlap, okay, because there were many breakthrough cases where Filipinos were vaccinated, but that's significant population protection, right? 55 million and 55 million, even if it's only just a third overlapping, you're dealing with 80 million or so have fresh, right, have immune protection of some sort. So the wood is wet, right? Either the wood is completely burnt or the wood is wet. So now you're going to ask, can we have another fire? Well,
yes.
So I think most people now are saying, at least for many, many months, there will be a lull. There will be and throughout the world. Next thing, can there be a variant that can come about that is as transmissible and more severe? More and more scientists are saying less and less likely now.
Why? Why is that? Is it because the virus has weakened? Is it on its way to death? Is it safe to say that it's nearing its point of non-existence, or at least it's harmless?
So let me try to explain the molecular biology a little bit. So you have the Wuhan virus and the Omicron virus, and they're both very different. So the Wuhan virus is alpha, beta, gamma, and delta. Those are actually all Wuhan variants.
Okay.
And then out of nowhere, you had this Omicron variant, which is very, very different from the Wuhan variants.
Yeah.
Okay. So now you have got immunity against this Wuhan, and now you have immunity against Omicron, and they're very different. Okay. So now let's say you want to develop a new variant. Well, the new variant has to hide from your body's missiles that can get Wuhan and can get Omicron. There is very few intermediates that are neither this or this, right? So to get a third one that is different from Wuhan and different from Omicron is so challenging because there's a limit to the number of ways you can change the virus before you break the virus.
All right.
Stealth variant of Omicron. How worried should we be about that?
Absolutely nothing. I'm not worried at all. So the why, and I've explained this, and Prof.
The
Guido and I
BA.2.
agree on this, right? So if you look at the number of cases, so the the stealth variant, was identified December 6 in the UK. After a month, there were 426 cases. The Omicron, in that same time, even shorter in the NCR, 200,000. So you got 400 and 200,000. Which one is stronger? So what you see is that stealth variant cannot beat the Omicron. And in order for a new variant to appear, it must beat Omicron. If it cannot beat Omicron, it is dead. Just like that IHMU, the one from France, 42 mutations, very different, but could not beat Delta, could not beat Omicron. Wala na.
Okay. So can Omicron recur? Can Delta recur? Can Gamma recur?
So Omicron is now prevalent. What this means is that for those of us who were vaccinated, or for those of us who got some other variant, as our immunity wanes, we get Omicron. So maybe, you were vaccinated and you did not get Omicron, but maybe 8 months from now, you will get Omicron, but it's mild. And every time you get it, your body is stronger and better. So every time you get Omicron, and you could get it every year, first of all, it provides immunity against Omicron. And second, it becomes milder on you because your body is stronger. This is why it's moving to endemic, right? Because even if you get it every year, it becomes milder and mild. The virus may not change, but your body learns how to fight Omicron. So after a while, you are not vulnerable anymore.
So why are we vaccinating the children? That's what people will logically ask. If you're saying that we're actually seeing the end of it, why are we expanding the vaccination to include children?
Because they have never seen COVID-19 yet. So when their body is completely blind, right? So if they get Omicron, the chances of them getting a severe case is still greater than if I ever got Omicron because I'm vaccinated already. For the adults who are vaccinated, the vaccination exposed the body to COVID-19. So we are ready to fight. The children have never seen COVID. So even Omicron, which is mild to the adults who've been vaccinated, may not necessarily be as such. And we don't know the long-term effects of long COVID on them, you see? So this is why the idea here is we don't want the worst thing you do is to get COVID-19 without any protection at all, because we don't know how badly it will impact you. But if you've had some protection, either from a previous infection or from a vaccination, you will be better off.
Professor Guido, I want to ask you about your survey I think it's survey on vaccine hesitancy. It has dropped to 5%. That's pretty low. What do you attribute that to? Mas ano ba siya sa disincentives or sa incentives? Meaning, among the disincentives, of course, is the no vax, no ride.
Actually, yeah, it's down to 5%.
Yes.
And if we recall, yung history ng surveys namin, originally back in 2020, the vaccine hesitancy was, I think, as high as 75%, meaning only 1 out of 4 Filipinos were at that time willing to get vaccinated. Some were, 50-50, and then there was 50% who did not want to get vaccinated. Now it's down to all the way to 5%. And we tend to think this 5% would probably be among the group of people who have certain beliefs that, for them, they do not want to get vaccinated because it's against their beliefs. I think it's almost at that level where this 5% is accounted for mostly by their either religious beliefs or something personal beliefs or comorbidities, which is also possible. So, but this was done in December. I can't remember if we already were in discussions about,
No
things
vax,
like
no
no
vax.
vax, no ride. Yeah, but I think we were talking about safe spaces back then. But the thing is, I think most people, well, it's like a recruitment process when they see more and more people getting vaccinated, and they're not seeing any side effects, basically.
effects.
Yeah, and they know people who got vaccinated. I think that's the best way to get people to convince people to get vaccinated. And of course, there's also if there was no threat of a virus or a variant, a lot of people would probably say, well, I don't need to get vaccinated. There's no more threat. I mean, if if the Delta was basically disappearing, but because of the threat of Omicron, and when we conducted a survey, there was already the threat of Omicron. People were already hearing about it. So I think these threats make people realize, they have to choose. Do I want to face Omicron without vaccination, or do I want to face it with vaccination? It goes to what Father's saying. It's better for you to have yourself some level of protection, because if you face it without vaccination, what Father's saying is that if you are vaccinated and you get it, then it will add to your level of protection in terms of antibodies and facing new variations. But if you don't have vaccination and you face it, it's like you're facing it unarmed. You don't have any defense, and you have to wait for your body to develop these antibodies, which could take time, and it could bring in some certain side effects with it because of the wait time. So that's why I think a lot of people eventually decided that regardless of some things they believe in, they decided to get vaccinated. And of course, this is good news. And I think we have the vaccines ready. I mean, Father's part of the vaccine, team. So I hope we can use up all these vaccines and, get boosters also. And at the same time, vaccinate those in areas with low vaccine coverage, because as Ed was mentioning, kanina, how bad can it be? We don't really know if it hits a rural place with low vaccine coverage, because what we saw in Metro Manila was that it can overwhelm the staffing, not because of the number of beds in LCR, but because of people, healthcare workers getting COVID and they have to isolate, and this reduces the staffing capacity. But what if this happens in a province with low vaccine coverage? So you have healthcare workers possibly catching COVID and not being there to attend to beds, and then you have a higher number of cases because more people are unvaccinated. That will lead to more hospitalizations. It could lead to more deaths. I mean, we don't want to we're not making projections on the worst case possible, but but it could definitely be worse than what we experienced in NCR.
With the numbers the way they are, do you think that border controls should ease? I mean, the quarantines, and not just domestically, but also globally.
Well, let me respond to that. So,
Father Nick.
So it is clear that we have the space now to consider shortening the traveler quarantine requirements for several reasons. The primary reason why we have these quarantine requirements is to prevent the entry of a variant of concern.
Right.
So right now, Omicron is dominant in our country. So actually, it is riskier for a person to arrive in the Philippines because he may get Omicron here right now in a way that he will not elsewhere in the world where the Omicron surge is not hit. So for example, Singapore or Thailand, right? We are still in the middle of our wave, number one. Number two, the incubation period for Omicron is 3 days as compared to 5. So right now the current is that 5 days. There's a 5-day quarantine facility requirement that you have to stay in a hotel. You're tested from the 5th day and you can leave. I actually believe we can shorten this to 3, as long as we require pre-departure testing, right? So you're going to limit the number of people who are positive on the plane to decrease transmission on the journey, and then you still require them for a very brief quarantine here in the Philippines. But overall, again, it's not as important as it was before the surge because Omicron is here. So what are you trying to prevent from entering?
Right.
Pretty much everybody, you come into Metro Manila, you might
How
go to
people feel.
Poblacion now, you go to Poblacion now to a party. Everyone around you is either got Omicron or will give you Omicron, so it's less likely now to trigger anything of concern.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Sana nga. Okay.
Okay, Professor, Father, unfortunately, we have already run out of time. Much as I want to ask a matter of great importance about your beer vaccine, we'll have to park it for another day.
In progress.
Yeah.
Not to worry, we will ask you
Beer
about that
vaccine.
at a later date because that is of public interest, in the interest of journalism as well. Maraming salamat po, Father Nico
Good evening po. God bless.
Thank
Thank
you,
you, David.
Father.
Thank you,
of
everyone.
Octa Research.
Yeah.
Ingat po. That will be all for this edition of the Chiefs. We hope what we discuss here will keep the conversation going. Before we go, a reminder to our viewers, mask on, wash hands, and stay safe, Philippines. I'm Edwin Gao.
I'm Ami Pamintuan of the Philippine Star.
And I'm Lucy Cruz, Valdez, News 5, and we are One News.